Hi, I want to welcome you to Genealogy 101. My name is Crystal Ward, and today Alice Winslow and I will be discussing how one gets started with genealogy research. I want to thank you for spending your time here with us today and hope that you learned something new about genealogy research. Let me first introduce myself and my colleague, Alice Winslow. Alice has had an interest in family history for many years. She's researched her family in Ireland and Germany and has a master's in library science degree from Indiana University. She spent 12 years as an elementary school media specialist, and now she is working as a librarian in the genealogy division at the Indiana State Library. I have been working in libraries for about 15 years. I started out as a page at the Hallville branch of Indianapolis-Marion County Public Library. I have worked at the Indianapolis Museum of Art Library, Heron School of Art Library, IUPUI University Library, and most recently as a librarian at Marion County Jail 2. I currently work at the Indiana State Library in the genealogy division, and I have two mini schnauzers. They'll be helping us today with your family history research. Genealogy research is about finding answers, asking questions, and solving problems. This research can be difficult, frustrating, and time-consuming. Hopefully, after today's presentation, you will be better equipped to begin your research by understanding the principles of genealogy research, knowing where to look, how to get started, establishing achievable goals, and having an idea about the different record sets available and what information you are seeking. You will find that genealogy research is enjoyable, a little less frustrating, and worth the time. I'll start by talking about the three basic principles in family history research. We will cover how to get started with ancestry, talking about setting achievable goals, and I will end my portion of the discussion by introducing you to the genealogy community. I will then hand the presentation over to Alice, who will explain the different record sets, what information you can look for in these particular records. The three basic principles that we will cover today are 1. Start with yourself, 2. Ask questions of your relatives, and 3. Work backwards in time. The first principle to genealogy research is to start with yourself. And by this, I mean record or write down all the details that you personally know about your relatives. Write down where your parents' names, your birth information, wedding dates, and sibling information. Once you've finished with your immediate family, work backwards and start with your grandparents, uncles, aunts, and so forth. I encourage you to look around your house or your relatives for wedding announcements, funeral cards, diaries, church bulletins, school photos, or yearbooks. Record this information on a group sheet or pedigree chart and try to fill in as much information that you can. Create a research log of your findings. Write down where you have already looked and what results you found. For example, I keep a notebook and jot down what family names I have looked for on certain databases and search engines. This prevents me from duplicating a search. I'll write down that I looked for a marriage record for my Piatt and Cord grandparents in the ISL marriage database. I will note if I found a record so that I don't continue to look in the same place. I'll also write down what spellings I used when I search ancestry or family search. Often my family name is misspelled, and I want to know which spelling I searched and which ones returned more results. Looking over what you have compiled at this point, and create a to-do list of information you want to find. Look over your family group sheets and pedigree charts, and look for holes or gaps in information. Here is an example of a pedigree chart for 6 generations. There are all different kinds of pedigree charts that you can use. I Google pedigree charts, and you can see that there are different types and forms that can be downloaded for free. This is Alice's pedigree chart, and you can see that she has filled out as much information as she can. Alice once told me that she was very fortunate that many who came before her were interested in their family history, and she was able to add to what they started. She knows most of the dates and places for some of her ancestors by asking questions, and she wants to dig further to find out more about their lives, exactly where they lived, where they worked, and where they went to church. It's also important to mention that as you begin your research, you should record all citations. Make note of where you found the information. For example, did you find your grandmother's birth date on a birth certificate or word of mouth from a family member? Having citations will be helpful later if you have found some questionable information or are challenged by a distant relative who has done some research themselves. It is particularly important to record where you found the information if you plan to join a lineage society like the Daughters of the American Revolution or Sons of the American Revolution. This is a research question form, and this is another form that can be used to write down questions you have and possible information sources. This is particularly helpful if you are a note taker or a list maker. I prefer this form because I can jot down random facts that might be helpful later on in my research. This brings us to the second basic principle: ask questions. Make sure you ask precise questions and listen to what your relatives tell you. It is a good idea to bring a notebook and jot down any stories that your relatives may tell. You might consider investing in a digital recorder or use a smartphone. Ask open-ended questions that inspire your interviewee to elaborate on the details. Think outside the box when you ask questions. For example, don't just ask when and where they were born, but ask what schools they went to. Many historical societies are digitizing yearbooks. Alice found this digitized 1938 Shortridge High School yearbook and found her father's senior picture. She had never seen any pictures of him at that age. She also looked through some of the club pictures and found the author Kurt Vonnegut pictured as a sophomore as the member of the student council. A few things to ask. Did your family move around a lot? Were they part of a church, community service center, or organization? Did they have hobbies or join the Girls or Boy Scouts? What industries did your relatives work in? Several big companies here in Indy have archives and could contain employee records. Keep in mind that many organizations keep these records and that your relatives might show up in them. You want to work backwards in time, and this is our third principle. You want to start with yourself in order to connect one generation to the previous generation. When you work backwards, you can establish that you are related to the previous generation. When you skip over generations, you are losing the connections and possible relatives. One of the most difficult research strategies to perform is to work forward in time, or trying to connect yourself to a particular family. You will see this a lot when people try to connect themselves to a famous family or claim Native American ancestry. The reason why you don't want to take this approach is that you might miss or leave out family members. Working from the past to the present, or from a famous relative to yourself, is called reverse genealogy, or tracing descendants. This most often leads to a false direction or researching a family that you are not related to, and thus wasting a lot of time. Now that you know the basics, it's time to talk about setting achievable goals in your research. I recommend that you start small and pick a certain detail that you don't know about your family. Discover when vital records were kept. For example, birth and death records were not required to be kept or created in Indiana until 1907, and then it wasn't strictly enforced until 1920. Understanding the timeframes for records can prevent useless searches for a birth certificate that never existed. Look over what you know and look at your want to know list. I looked over my list and I wanted to find the date of my grandparents' marriage. Starting with the details that I personally knew, I know that they were married in the 1920s in Marion County and have always lived on the west side of Indianapolis. They were Irish Catholic and attended St. Anthony's Church. Using this information, I'm going to look at local newspapers for wedding announcements, census records, and city directories to narrow down when they became a family. Alice is going to go into more in-depth research methods later, so I'll let her elaborate on this in more detail. Review what you have found out and check back with the same sources or databases as more records are added or digitized. As time goes by, more records or census records are released in accordance with privacy laws or policies. Now, talking about achievable goals. I have searched, but I haven't been able to find Dwight or Moses' birth certificates. I'm beginning to think that they may be adopted. By now, you should be ready to get started on your research. And using some tools of the trade, you'll want to search Ancestry.com, FamilySearch.org, and FindAgrave.com to get your feet wet. Play around with these tools and become familiar with the search options. Keep in mind that names are often misspelled, and you want to keep an open minding about misspellings. Let's look at Ancestry.com, and let me show you a shortcut that I like to use. So you'll want to go to the home page of Ancestry. Now this is the library edition, so it might look slightly different with your home subscription. You want to focus on the top left-hand side of the page. From there you'll click on the search button. A drop-down menu should appear, and click on the All Categories option. This should take you to a page with the map of the United States. I click on Indiana, and this should give you a list of available databases that are searchable with Indiana records. So you should see something like this. Here's the screen, and you can see that it breaks down what records are available to search. I use the Indiana death certificates a lot, and the Indiana marriage database. For example, if you're looking for Aunt Jean's death record from 1980 in Indianapolis, Indiana, you can click on Indiana death certificates 1899 to 2011 database. Family Search is organized, operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was previously known as the Genealogical Society of Utah, or GSU, and it is the largest genealogical organization in the world. Family Search maintains a collection of records, resources, and services designed to help people learn more about their family history. Family Search gathers, preserves, and shares genealogical records worldwide. It offers free access to its resources and services online at FamilySearch.org, one of the most heavily used genealogical sites on the internet. This is a direct quote from their wiki page, and I personally use it a lot in my research, both personally and professionally. Family Search also has family charts and trees that users have uploaded and are available to the public. I think one of their best assets is its wiki page that they have created for genealogy. They are loaded with a lot of concise information and links to online genealogical records. Another often overlooked resource is their catalog of books and microfilm, which can be borrowed and sent to other family history affiliate libraries, so you can view them yourself. All you have to do is create an account, and then you're ready to order microfilm. You would use the Family Search Catalog microfilm. You click on Search, then Catalog. You will be directed to the web page on the left. Here you can see a search box for place. I entered Indianapolis, Indiana in the search box, and you can see the results by that search term. Your search will be broken into different types of records, such as church, city directories, or vital records, just to name a few. From here, you can click on the top of the record that interests you, and then you'll be shown the microfilm records that are available Once you get to the catalog record, you can request that the microfilm be sent to a family history affiliate library or family history center near you. The Indiana State Library is a family history affiliate library, and you can have microfilms sent to our location to be viewed on our microfilms. One source that I use a lot is findagrave.com. Find a Grave is a user-submitted database of graves. Keep in mind that people do make mistakes and that the source is not entirely dependent on the user inputting the information. I would recommend that you verify the information. Find a Grave can be searched by the name of the deceased or the cemetery, and you can narrow it down to the county level or state. One piece of advice that I want to share with you is join the genealogical community. Don't go it alone. Check out blogs written by experts in the community such as Dick Eastman, Judy Russell, and Amy Johnson Crow. Check out popular websites like Cindy's List. Join as many organizations that you can, such as historical societies, genealogical groups, lineage societies, and seek out help and fellowship. Facebook also has many genealogical groups that you can join in and follow. And listservs are a great way to get to know the community. There is one for genealogical librarians called GenLib, and it is geared towards librarians who service genealogical researchers. It's maintained by the University of South Florida. These people are researching their families, and they have been in your shoes. Who knows, you might even find a connection with someone, and you might find out that you're related. You have the awesome advantage of being part of a very helpful community, one that you should become involved in. Genealogical special interest groups often have classes, webinars, and yearly conferences. They can connect you with other researchers and also introduce you to more advanced classes or research. I have discussed how to get started, explained the importance of starting with yourself, asking questions, and working backwards in time. We covered a few basic genealogical websites and mentioned blogs, listservs, and websites. I covered the benefits of becoming a part of the community, and I'm going to hand over the presentation to my colleague, Alice Winslow. Should you have any questions, please visit our website at www.library.in.gov. You can also submit reference questions via the Ask a Librarian service.
Hi, I'm Alice Winslow, and I'll be presenting the second half of this webinar. Now we're going to take a look at some of the record sets you'll want to research. The federal population census records are a great place to start. Then you'll want to search the vital records, which include birth, marriage, and death records. Other records to look at are military records, city directories, newspapers, church records, Bible records, cemeteries, and county histories. Some additional records you can look at are funeral home records, wills and probate, land and court records, immigration and tax records, and maps and atlases. The first set of records we're going to look at is the U.S. Federal Population Census. It has been conducted every 10 years since 1790. However, because of privacy issues and confidentiality, the 1940 census is the most current one available to the public. The next population census to be released will be the 1950 census, and it will be released in the year 2022. There is a 72-year period until a population census is released for public research. There are many, many pieces of information to be found in the census records. Each census differs from decade to decade. Let's take a look at some examples. This is a 1790 census showing Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was living in Bedford, Pennsylvania. He was a physician, and Rush was an ardent abolitionist. These are the questions that were asked on this very first U.S. Census of 1790. They asked the name of the head of the family, address, number of free white males of 16 years and up, including heads, free white males under 16, free white females, including heads, all other free persons, and the number of slaves. He did not have any slaves, as you can see on this census. Beginning with the 1850 census, all of the members of the household are now named on the census. Before 1850, only the head of the household was named. This is the census record page for Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois, which includes the entry for Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln returned to Illinois in 1849 following a term in the House of Representatives. Notice how his first name is spelled on the original census. It is spelled Abram instead of Abraham. Ancestry adds the spelling variations. Abraham is the head of household. Also living in the household is his wife Mary, son Robert, and a Catherine Gordon. We can see that his occupation is listed as attorney at law. Here is the information obtained on this 1850 census, and these are the exact words used on the census: name, address, age, sex, color, white, black, or mulatto for each person, whether they are deaf and dumb, blind, insane, or idiotic. All free persons are required to give value of real estate owned, their profession, occupation, or trade for each male person over 15, their place of birth, whether they attended school within the year, whether unable to read and write for persons over 20, and whether they are a pauper or a convict. I want to talk a moment about spelling issues on the censuses. These are the 1860 and 1880 census pages for my great-great-grandfather, Dominic Farrell. Notice the 1860 census and the incorrect spelling of his name, Dominic O'Farrell. The correct spelling I have highlighted in blue. Then again, on the 1880 census, his name is incorrectly spelled as Dominic Farrell. It took me a lot of time just to find him on these two censuses. I have still not been able to find him on the 1850 and 1870 censuses, and I'm sure it's due to spelling issues. I'm sure the census takers, who are called enumerators, tried their best to write down names correctly. But we have to take into consideration a person's accent and mother tongue. Dominic probably had a very thick Irish brogue, and the enumerator probably wrote down exactly what he heard. If you do have trouble finding an ancestor on a census, try different spelling variations as you search. Here is the information obtained on the 1880 census that is different than previous, just to name a few. Now they are asking the relationship of the other people to the head of the household, as in wife, son, daughter, son-in-law, etc. They ask marital status and place of birth of the person listed, along with the place of birth of their own father and mother. Today's brick wall is brought to you by the 1890 census that was almost totally destroyed by fire in 1921. So there is a 20-year gap in the federal census from 1880 to 1900. Some states conducted a special census every 5 years in between the federal ones. These special censuses can help fill in gaps, along with using city directories to help fill in. I'll go into more detail with city directories a bit later. The last census we will look at is the 1910 census. At the top of the page of every census, you will find listed the township, county, state, date of enumeration, name of the enumerator, district and ward numbers in addition to the questions being asked. Notice all of the additional questions that have been added to the 1910 census. This time they ask marital status, number of years in present marriage. For women, they ask the number of children born and number now living. They ask the birthplace and mother tongue of the person and their parents. If they are foreign born, year of immigration, whether they're naturalized and whether they're able to speak English. If they can't speak English, then what is the language spoken? It asks the occupation, industry, and class of worker, whether they're an employee, whether out of work during the past year, and whether they lived on a farm or in a house. And now on this census, they asked if they are a survivor of the Union or Confederate Army or Navy. Let us now turn our attention to vital records. Indiana began issuing birth certificates in 1882. However, these records were optional until 1907, as Crystal mentioned. In 1907, the state of Indiana passed a law requiring all counties to register their births with the Indiana State Board of Health, and unfortunately, this didn't come into complete compliance until around 1920. Consequently, many births between 1882 and 1920 were not recorded. Thus, there isn't any record of their birth. Vital records from 1882 to the present are kept by the local health department in the county in which the birth or death took place. From 1907 to the present, the records are also kept by the Indiana State Department of Health. For births and deaths occurring prior to 1882, you will need to consult alternative record sources, such as religious records, cemetery records, census, county histories, family Bible records, or other places where vital information may have been recorded. There is a lot of information to be gleaned from a birth certificate. This 1920 Indiana birth certificate shows the date of birth, county, township, city, address, full name of child, whether the child was legitimate, yes or no, and whether they were twins or triplets. Also contained in this record is the name of the father and mother with her maiden name, the birthplace of mother and father, their age, occupation, race, number of children born to this mother, and the number of those still living, and then it's signed by the attending physician. Online at Ancestry, you can search the collection of Indiana birth records from 1907 to 1940. Marriages were recorded from the formation of the county. Marriage records prior to the late 1800s usually include only the names of the couple, the date of marriage, and sometimes the date of the license, the officiant's name, the county of marriage, and occasionally the names of witnesses. Late in the 1800s, more detailed marriage application forms were used. This early 1837 marriage record is a very simple handwritten entry. No specific form was available to use. It only has very basic information: the names of the two people getting married, the county, the date, perhaps the officiant's name, and the clerk of the court of the county. Many people assume that the old marriage records will have the names of both sets of parents. Unfortunately, the parents are not listed on these early marriage records. As you can see in this 1887 marriage record, a specific form was being used, but again, It's a very simple form and still doesn't really give us much information. The names of the parents are still not included on the record. As you can see in this 1917 marriage application form, a lot more information is contained in just this one record. This application has two columns, one for the male and one for the female's information. It asks the names of the people getting married, where and when they were born, their present residence and occupation. If no occupation, what means does the male contracting party have to support a family? Has the full name of father, his birthplace, and his occupation and residence, and then the same question of the male's mother. It asks, has the male contracting party been an inmate of a county asylum or home for indigent persons within the last 5 years? If so, is he now able to support a family and likely to so continue? Is this his first marriage? If not, how often has he been married? Is the male contracting party afflicted with epilepsy, tuberculosis, or any other contagious or transmissible disease? Then most of the same questions were asked of the female. Death records began in a few Indiana cities as early as the 1870s. The first law requiring county registration of death was passed in 1882. In 1900, all deaths were to be registered with the state, but compliance with the law varied again until 1920. Online in Ancestry, you can search the collection of Indiana death certificates 1899 to the year 2011. This is a 1926 death certificate for my great-grandfather, Michael Farrell. Take note of the information on this record. It has his place of death, township, county, city, and address, and personal statistics, sex, color or race, marital status, name of husband or wife, date of birth, age, and occupation. Also included is the name and birthplace of the father and the mother with her maiden name. Then the date of death, the main and secondary cause of death, and then signed by the doctor. The place and date of burial with the undertaker's name and address is also listed. It also includes the name and address of the informant. Let's take a moment to talk about the informant on a death certificate. This is the person who is giving the city official all of this information. So if it is a close family member, it's more likely that the information will be correct. However, if the informant is a neighbor or such, the information might not totally be accurate or complete. So you have to take this into consideration. On this death certificate, his wife Teresa was the informant, so we can be reasonably sure that the family information that she gave is correct. Moving on to military records. This is a Civil War draft registration of June 1863 in the 5th Congressional District, consisting of several counties in the state of Indiana. I came across this Civil War record from my great-great-grandfather, Michael Metz. I had not known that any of my ancestors had any involvement in the Civil War. This was mainly because of the timing of their immigration to America in the mid-1800s, and also because of their ages and the ages of their children. I came across Michael Metz's Civil War draft registration record on Ancestry. I have his entry highlighted. This record has his name, current residence, his age, which he was 40, his occupation, he was a tailor, and where he was born. He was born in Germany. This is a 1917 draft registration for World War I. It asks for name, residence, date and place of birth, occupation, where employed, any dependents, married or single, race, and any prior military service. It also asks if you claim exemption from the draft. In addition, it asks if the person is a natural-born citizen, a naturalized citizen, an alien, or have they declared their intentions to become a U.S. citizen. This draft registration also gives a physical description of the person, who happens to be my grandfather. He was of medium build, slender, blue eyes, black hair, and was not balding. Having a chart similar to this can be very helpful in determining if an ancestor may have been involved in any of these wars. If your ancestor falls within one of these ranges, you can then check for military records. If you just Google birth years of veterans chart, you'll come up with different charts like this one. Every major city had city directories, and they still do, that usually also included the small town areas around the major city. City directories can be very useful in finding an ancestor's address and occupation, and possibly documenting moves between publications, which were about every 2 years. Be sure to take a look at the table of contents in the directory to see what all information is included. You'll be surprised. Also, if you know what type of occupation or business your ancestor might have had, you can check the advertisements to see if their business might have been listed. City directories contained names and addresses of the people of the city, along with city businesses, advertisements, cemeteries, churches, hospitals, etc. The page on the left is from the 1926 Indianapolis City Directory. This entry shows my great-great-grandmother, Teresa Farrell, listed, and then it has her husband Michael's name next to her name with the abbreviation for widower. Then her address is listed. If you aren't sure of an ancestor's death date, this widower type information can be helpful in narrowing down the year of death. In this case, I already knew Michael Farrell had died the year before in 1925. I also think it's fun to look at the advertisements in the city directories. It can give you a look into that particular period of time. Newspapers can be a great source of information. You just have to have a good dose of patience to wade through them on microfilm. Notice the difference in the 1891 newspaper on the left and the 1965 newspaper page to the right of it. In the older paper, there is not a listing of the different sections with page numbers, and there were usually 6 to 9 columns packed with only text, no pictures. You'll also notice the older paper does not have article headings in big and bolder print. This makes it more difficult to look through. Newspapers may have listed marriage and death notices, legal notices, tax lists, and society-type news like the comings and goings of local residents. It's also interesting to look through newspapers from the town and time period your ancestor lived, because it can give you a glimpse into their daily lives. Obituaries were not common in Indiana newspapers until the very late 1800s. A brief death notice might be given, but you will probably have to read the entire newspaper to find it. The clipping on the top right corner is from the Cambridge City Tribune, showing a notice of the transfer of land from my great-great-grandfather Dominic Farrell to 2 of his adult children. This information can then lead me to look up deed records. Also, the lot and block numbers can be looked up on a city map to find the exact locations. The lower right corner clipping is society-type news you might find. Gravestones in cemeteries can hold valuable information. Sometimes you might find dates that might predate Indiana birth and death records. The lower right stone reads that Reuben Helm died April 26, 1894, and shows his age at death as 66 years, 6 months, and 25 days. So you can figure out his actual birth date with this information. Gravestones might also identify relationships such as mother, father, daughter, etc. The gravestone on the left reads, "In memory of Hannah, wife of Henry Waring and daughter of Samuel and Ann Ferris, who departed this life April 3, 1823, aged 72 years." The gravestone on the upper right identifies William Thorpe and his military service in the Civil War and also gives rank and company. This information can then be used for further research. You also might be able to obtain information from records in the cemetery office. And here we have just a list of some of the local places around Indianapolis and the state that you might be able to go to research and find resources. As we finish up, we thought you might enjoy seeing a few fun family trees using different designs. The one on the bottom left contains the characters of Pride and Prejudice. My personal favorite is the kid-drawn family tree. We hope you've enjoyed our presentation and hope that you now feel confident in starting your own genealogy research and also helping patrons who come into your library. Thank you so much for joining us today.